Yo, what's happening everyone? So I need to tell you about what went down on First Take yesterday, cause honestly I was completely stunned by where this conversation went and I'm still processing everything that was discussed. I had just finished reading Anthony Slater's bombshell article about what led to the Jonathan Kuminga split with the Golden State Warriors, and all the drama involving Joe Lacob's ego and Steve Kerr's frustration made myself some coffee to digest all the insanity, turned on ESPN to catch First Take, and there were Stephen A. Smith, Shannon Sharpe, and Mad Dog Russo getting ready to discuss the Warriors and their future after moving on from Kuminga. Hey, what's up everyone? Real quick before we get into everything, that like button is literally what determines if this reaches hundreds or thousands of fans. Takes 1 second, but makes a huge impact on the channel's growth. Just smash that like button right now. It's the easiest thing you can do, but honestly the biggest way to support this content, every single like pushes this further, so hit it now. But instead of just breaking down the Kuminga situation or talking about how Joe Lacob's meddling destroyed the team, they pivoted into this absolutely wild discussion about whether the Warriors should be pursuing Ja Morant from the Memphis Grizzlies to completely transform their offense and give them the explosive playmaker they desperately need now that they've moved on from Kuminga. And man, the way this entire segment unfolded had me sitting there completely engaged because they were covering everything from the Warriors' need for isolation scoring to their transition game struggles to whether trading significant assets for a young all-star point guard with injury and off-court concerns makes sense when you're trying to maximize what's left of Steph Curry's championship window. The show opened in this really frustrated way because instead of immediately jumping into the Ja Morant discussion, Stephen A. started by absolutely going off about Joe Lacob and how his ego has destroyed the Warriors dynasty. He was talking about how Lacob thought he knew better than everyone including Steph Curry, Draymond Green, and Steve Kerr, how he insisted on drafting Jonathan Kuminga over Franz Wagner because he wanted to prove he was the smartest guy in the room, and how that decision has now set the franchise back years. Stephen A. was really emphasizing how billionaire venture capitalists are not basketball talent evaluators, and Lacob's hubris is the reason the Warriors are in the mess they're in now. Shannon Sharpe immediately jumped in and started breaking down the Jonathan Kuminga situation and why it became such a disaster. He was talking about how Kuminga believed he was going to be a multi-time all-star when clearly he wasn't that caliber of player, how Steve Kerr wanted him to be a complimentary player like Shawn Marion or Aaron Gordon, but Kuminga wanted to be the star, and how that disconnect led to the relationship becoming toxic. Shannon made this really compelling point about how when you play alongside a top 10 player of all time like Steph Curry, you need to know your role, and Kuminga never figured that out. Mad Dog came in absolutely fired up, and he was yelling about how the Warriors wasted years trying to develop Kuminga when they should have traded him and those draft picks when they were at their peak after winning the championship in 2022. He was talking about how the Warriors could have added another star to play with Steph and Draymond, how they could have extended their championship window, but instead Joe Lacob's pride got in the way. Mad Dog was really emphasizing how the Warriors are now in salary cap hell because they held onto Kuminga for too long and they need to make a bold move to salvage what's left of the Steph Curry era. Stephen A. brought the conversation specifically to Ja Morant, and this is where things got really interesting. He started explaining Morant's situation in Memphis and why he might actually be available despite being one of the most talented young guards in the league. Stephen A. was talking about how Morant has dealt with injuries, including shoulder issues that have kept him out significant time, how he's had off-court problems including the gun incident that got him suspended, and how the Grizzlies might be willing to move on if they get a massive package. He was really emphasizing how Morant is only 25 years old, and when healthy and focused is a top 15 player in the league who could completely change the Warriors' offensive identity. Shannon jumped back in and started talking about why Ja Morant would be such a perfect fit for what the Warriors need right now. He was explaining how the Warriors have historically thrived on ball movement and three-point shooting, but how they've struggled in isolation situations and when their offense stalls out in the playoffs. Shannon made this point about how Morant brings that aggressive attacking mentality that can break down defenses, how he's one of the best transition players in basketball, and how that would add a completely different dimension to the Warriors' offense that they don't have with anyone on their current roster. Mad Dog interrupted and started talking about what it would actually cost to acquire Ja Morant from Memphis. He was explaining how the Grizzlies would want a massive haul including multiple first-round picks and young players, how the Warriors just got Chris Porzingis in the Kuminga trade so maybe they could flip him in a package, and how they'd essentially be going all in on winning now. Mad Dog was making this argument about how the Warriors don't have time to rebuild. Steph is 37 years old and they need to make aggressive moves to compete while they still can. Stephen A. came back and started discussing how Morant would specifically fit alongside Steph Curry and the current Warriors roster. He was explaining how having two elite guards who can both create would give the Warriors incredible offensive versatility, how they could stagger their minutes to always have a playmaker on the court, and how defenses wouldn't be able to just focus on stopping Steph anymore. Stephen A. was arguing that Morant's ability to attack the rim and finish through contact would open up even more space for Steph to work on the perimeter. Shannon got back in there and started talking about the transition game and how Morant would revolutionize that aspect of the Warriors' offense. He was explaining how the Warriors used to be great in transition, but they've slowed down as their core has aged, and how Morant is one of the most dangerous transition players in the entire league. Shannon was making this passionate argument about how adding Morant would bring back that pace and excitement that made the Warriors so fun to watch during their championship runs. Mad Dog jumped in and started talking about the injury concerns and whether that should make the Warriors hesitate. He was yelling about how yes, Morant has dealt with shoulder injuries and other issues, but how he's still young enough that he should recover fully, and how when you have a 37-year-old franchise player like Steph, you can't afford to be cautious. Mad Dog was making this point about how the Warriors need to take risks at this stage of their championship window because playing it safe isn't going to get them back to the finals. Stephen A. then shifted the conversation to talk about the off-court concerns and Steve Kerr's ability to handle that. He was explaining how Morant had the gun incident on social media that got him suspended, how there have been questions about his judgment and maturity, but how Steve Kerr is a strong enough coach to keep him in line. Stephen A. was arguing that Kerr has dealt with difficult personalities before, including Draymond Green, and he would know how to manage Morant and keep him focused on basketball. Shannon came back and made an interesting point about how this would impact the Warriors' identity and culture. He was talking about how the Warriors pride themselves on unselfish play and moving the ball, and how some people might worry that Morant's ball-dominant style wouldn't fit. Shannon was explaining that great players adapt, and Morant is smart enough to understand that playing with Steph Curry and in Steve Kerr's system would require him to play differently than he did in Memphis. Mad Dog started getting animated again, and he was talking about Joe Lacob and whether he would have the guts to make this trade after the Kuminga disaster. He was explaining how Lacob's ego got bruised by admitting he was wrong about Kuminga, but how trading for Morant would be his chance to redeem himself. Mad Dog was making this argument about how great owners know when to admit mistakes and make bold moves to fix them, and this would be Lacob's opportunity to do that. Stephen A. brought up the comparison between Morant and other potential targets the Warriors could pursue. He was explaining how the Warriors could go after role players and try to build depth, or they could swing big and get a genuine star like Morant. Stephen A. was arguing that when you have Steph Curry, you can't waste time with role players. You need to add elite talent while you still have the chance. Shannon jumped back in and started talking about the defensive concerns and whether Morant's defense is good enough for the Warriors system. He was explaining how the Warriors have always valued defense under Steve Kerr, but how Morant's offense is so good that it more than compensates for any defensive limitations. Shannon was making this point about how you don't trade for Ja Morant to play defense. You trade for him to score 30 points and create easy baskets for everyone else. Mad Dog came back and started discussing the salary cap implications and how the Warriors would make this work financially. He was explaining how the Warriors are already in the luxury tax and the second apron, but how when you're trying to win championships, you can't worry about money. Mad Dog was yelling about how the Warriors' ownership is one of the richest in the league, and if they're serious about winning, they need to spend whatever it takes. Stephen A. then brought the conversation to the timeline and whether now is the right time for this move. He was explaining how the Warriors just moved on from Kuminga and got Chris Porzingis, how they're in a transition period, but how adding Morant would signal they're still committed to winning with Steph. Stephen A. was arguing that the worst thing the Warriors could do is waste another year being mediocre. They need to either go all in or start rebuilding, and trading for Morant would be going all in. Shannon got back in there and started talking about what the Warriors would have to give up and whether it's worth it. He was explaining how the trade package would probably include multiple first-round picks and potentially Chris Porzingis or other young pieces, but how when you're getting Ja Morant in return, it's absolutely worth it. Shannon was making this passionate argument about how draft picks are just lottery tickets, and you're hoping to get a player as good as Morant, so why not just trade for the proven star? Mad Dog jumped in and started talking about the Western Conference and why the Warriors need to make a move like this to compete. He was explaining how teams like Oklahoma City, Denver, and Minnesota are stacked with young talent and how the Warriors can't compete with those teams by just standing pat. Mad Dog was making this point about how you need multiple stars to win in today's NBA, and Morant would give them that second star alongside Steph. Stephen A. started wrapping things up by talking about the risk versus reward of this potential trade. He was explaining how yes, there are injury concerns and off-court concerns, and it would cost significant assets, but how the upside of having Ja Morant paired with Steph Curry for the next few years is too good to pass up. Stephen A. was arguing that the Warriors should absolutely pursue Morant if he becomes available because their championship window is closing fast.